Welcome to the Tales of a Red Clay Rambler podcast, featuring interviews with culture makers from around the world. This is Ben Carter. I'm going to be your host. If you'd like more information on the show, please visit our website, talesofaredclayrambler.com. Welcome back to episode 437 of the podcast. Thank you all for tuning in. Today on the show, I'm talking with British studio potter Kitty Shepard. Her slipware vessels feature brightly colored images from pop culture. In our interview, we talk about her recent towel work linking vintage lipsticks to iconic music, as well as her duo portraits of Freddie Mercury and Queen Elizabeth. Kitty is based in Granada, Spain, where she's lived for many years, but is getting ready to open her first major exhibition at Messums, London, which is titled Word of Mouth. That's going to be opening October the 19th, and you can find out more about that at messums.com. Before we get to that interview, I wanted to thank the folks that donated to our spring fund drive. We are listener-supported, so I'd like to thank Cindy Casemere, Sandra Belakowski, and Denise Joyle for their contributions. If you'd like to get involved yourself, you can do so a couple of ways. The first of which is to go to talesofaredclayrambler.com/donate. There you will find the PayPal portal. You can also sign up as a patron over on Patreon, which includes lots of perks, in specifically the Tales from the Vault podcast feed, which is a dedicated feed for Patreon subscribers that features episodes that are no longer available on major podcast apps. If you want to sign up for that, you can do that at patreon.com/redclayrambler. Without further ado, we'll get to the interview. Well, let's start at the present and work backwards then. You're getting ready for this big show at Messums, which opens in, I think, the 19th, right?
It opens on the 19th, yes.
So talk us through the process of making this body of work for that show.
It's taken me well over a year, actually. We were going to have the exhibition in a different venue, another Messums venue. But things happened. We had the COVID, and that venue was no longer functioning. So I was moved to Mayfair. Mayfair is probably the most prestigious location I could be showing. And if you consider I've never had a major show before, it's a little bit frightening.
Yeah.
The show is going to go there. It's taken me over a year to get ready for it, and I'm ready.
So before we started recording, you were talking about all of the processes that have to happen to actually make work in Spain where you live and then get it to London.
Get it to London. One of the hardest processes is getting my clay, because I have worked as a potter for decades, and I use a Staffordshire clay from England, and it works for me. It fits. It fits my body, it fits my glaze, it fits my slip. And the thought of changing that is just too terrifying for words. Because my processes are they're very simple, but they're complicated. You know, we're changing rock into clay, and then I'm firing it and turning it back into rock, essentially. So all of those fits have to work. And so getting my clay is very hard. It was easy before the United Kingdom had Brexit. And then it became very difficult to bring the clay into Spain, into Europe. But I can do it. I've done it now. I now have a route in. But also all my glazes, they are all British as well. I just cannot change it. I did try using a local Spanish clay, but it was so high in iron that it was fluxing all over the place. I fire really high with this Staffordshire clay. I fire 1110, that's high for an earthenware. And to take a Spanish clay to that, it was just collapsing. So that part was difficult for me.
Yeah, and let's talk about, I am a slipware potter myself, so I'm really familiar with your process. But for people that are listening, can you describe that relationship between clay fit, slip fit, and glaze fit, and why that's so hard?
Well, it's shrinkage. The clay shrinks quite a lot, actually, 11.75%. That's quite substantial. And so I have to make sure the slip shrinks at the same. And I know the glaze works just through trial and error. I don't know, I can't remember, it's so long since I've done it. All these tests. So basically that is the problem. It's just the shrinkage that I have to think about and make sure works. If it doesn't work, I soon know about it, because I'll get a sintering, which is such a lovely word. I don't know if that's a British word or if it's something you have in the States as well, sintering.
I've heard the term, but I don't. Is
well,
it where
it means off? That the glaze sort of shivers off.
Oh yeah, shivering.
And you can be sitting there with a pot and everything will be quite stable, and suddenly it'll go ping, ping, and you think, oh Christ! And it's not cracks; it's actually throwing off a little scale of glaze, and it's really, really the worst thing that could happen.
Yeah, and part of your process is adding colorants to slips. Is that how you're getting the bright colors?
That's how I'm getting the bright colors. When I first, I know where I'm going back a bit. When I first started making pottery, it was very traditional. It was Thomas Toft type work with found clays and found colors, all brown, black, blue. That was it, with honey glaze. And I did that for a very long time. And I got color very suddenly. I think something happened in my life, and I thought, should we try a bit of color? And that was it, and I never went back. So the colors I use, again, they're from England, and they're stains rather than, or some are oxides, pure oxides, but they're very strong, really, really strong, those colors. And they take a lot of preparation. Sometimes I have to grind them on a glass slab with a glass pestle. They get sieved through the finest sieves I can possibly find. And yeah, so that's how I do it, mainly with stains and some pure oxides.
And one of the things that I love about your work is that you have a lot of variations of one color. So let's think about the lipstick panels. There were 48 tiles. Yes. I think you described them as ceramic plaques somewhere else, because they're not tiles like tiling
I think
wall.
Tiles is good.
But there are all these lipsticks, and they're very subtle shades that make them different. So can you talk about understanding subtlety in color with that specifically?
It's all done by eye. Sometimes I think, I should record this. I sometimes do make test tiles, but then I actually forget what I've done. So I've stopped doing that. So it is just eye. I just mix it up, because the stains are colored with a vegetable dye so that I can see what I'm doing. It's just intuitive. I just work my way through it. If I'm copying a lipstick color, I'm working with an image of that lipstick to try and emulate what I've got there.
Can you talk about the relationship of that work to music? Because they're all linked to specific songs in different times.
Yes. The exhibition has the first drop, which is called Word of Mouth, which is about the lipsticks. The second panel is called The Needle Drop, which is about the music. All of these pieces of music are songs that mean a lot to me. They're bands that I used to go and see. And, when I was very young, it's a simple story, and it's just the story of names, whether it be the song names or the lipstick names. It is a bit eccentric. It is it's a naming convention, which I'm fascinated by, the calling of things. And the song titles were not going to go into the show. To start off with, nobody was really sure about these, and the lipsticks. And I explain it by saying, well, if I'm going out, when I was going out at 17, I would take with me my keys, my money, my fags, and my lipstick. And that was it. That is all I needed to go out to go and see The Cure in Camden or wherever. And then when off I would go on the bus, and I needed the lipstick for one very important thing. It was a tool of transformation. It would change everything. As soon as I put it on, I could become somebody else. And once I explained that to people, they said, oh, I see, I understand. I didn't know that. But I said, that is all you need for a successful night out. There's your money, your keys, and your fags, and your lipsticks. I mean, I'm glad to say I don't smoke anymore. But in those days, everybody smokes. And yeah, every single song is a song that means an awful lot to me, which is why they are such a strange collection.
Well, you said it, collection. And I think that there is a little hint into your psychology here with this piece specifically, and that it's a collection of moments, you know, the moments you've heard these songs in person and how they've reflected on you as a person as you've gotten older. But it's also a collection of objects. Like you can almost see your obsessiveness in this type of collection.
Yeah, totally, yeah.
So let's talk about that. When did you first start collecting things, whether it was artist or not, just pre-artist life?
Well, I started collecting things quite young. And I actually started collecting pottery shards because I worked as a young girl, probably about age 16, on archaeological digs. And I really liked doing that. It was great. And that was the first time I discovered slipware, because I was working on digs in a city called Chichester, which is a Roman city in the south of England. And I just loved it. It was like finding pieces of cake, because they were all broken, but they looked like icing on cake. So that was the first thing I started collecting. I mean, some of them I wasn't allowed to keep, but I still have some of those shards. And then I started collecting pebbles and shells and everything. So I've always been a collector. I'm always watching for things. I'm looking for things. I find things in the street, and squirrel them away and keep them.
Well, what I like is that you're collecting a form of consumption in a way, because makeup in the lipsticks in this instance, it's so much about like you want this color and this color and this color. Like I don't know, I've never worn lipstick, but I'm assuming you buy more than one at once.
Well, apparently one does. As I say, I don't wear makeup at all. I do buy vintage lipsticks off auction sites, just because I have to have them. But no, I don't wear it at all.
Well, what it makes me think of though is British consumerism. Like this is
it is British. Well, it's global consumerism as well. It's and it's social observation. It is fascinating when we go back to looking at the panel of the cosmetic lipsticks. Some of the names, some of them are quite misogynistic. To call a lipstick copper knockers is quite something. But yeah, if you look at that panel, you think, is that really a name? So yeah. And Lolita, I mean, what a name for a lipstick. It's outrageous.
Let's talk about British consumerism as a whole, because nostalgia is a big part of your work.
Very big, yeah.
You see this in the jars you make in other large forms. And this was the same case in the States too. Like post-World War II, there was almost this idea that like we're going to spend our way out of the pain of the war. And so you have in the 60s this like mega boom of everything from, the fancy oven to the toaster to the lipstick to the dress to the whatever. It was this sort of massive consumerist project. So can you talk about how that influences you as an artist? Like what you find interesting about referencing that?
It's really all about my memories and my childhood. That's why I put the soft scoop ice cream on the jars, because they meant so much to me as a child. And I'm just reliving that. I am worshipping it in this form, and the same with the ice lollies. But also, funny enough, I was reminded of a pot earlier today that I made, it was a pot with Concord on it. And I made this pot with Concord on because my mother went on the last penultimate flight of Concord.
Oh, wow.
But she never came back. Well, she did, but she didn't come back the same person. She wasn't well. But that it was about grief, and it was about remembering those moments. And I must say, I do very much like aeroplanes. I put aeroplanes on quite a few of my earlier pieces. So that is why I choose these images from, the shopping and the world around us, because I've become completely obsessed with them. That's probably what it is.
Do you mind if I ask you questions about your family?
No, of course, I'll ask away.
Tell me about your experience with both of your parents, sort of how their aging affected you as a person who is also aging, but much younger in that process.
Yes, much younger. I had a really unconventional childhood. I had a father who disappeared when I was quite young, and reappeared. He was working as, I think he was working as a spy. It's never really been made absolutely clear. And he was a very interesting character. And then my mother married another man who was our daddy, and he was great. He was everything that he was supposed to be. So that part of my childhood was, it was unconventional, I would say. My parents were great party goers, and my mother was very, very attractive, and she had everything that went with it. We used to hang around with people like the Rolling Stones, and
Wow.
Yeah, it was very strange.
Yeah.
Although I was quite young, it was quite an eccentric life.
So your father, let's talk about him a little bit. I think I heard this in another interview that you at one point found that he had many different passports in different names.
Yes, he had loads of passports. He had the same name in all of them.
Oh, okay. But it makes me think about identities, like if he was a spy or whatever it is he was doing with all of these different things. It's the concept of like, I'm a different person in a different country. I'm a different person. And he was not with you when you were young.
No.
Did you make a myth of a person about him because he wasn't around, or did you just kind of forget that?
No, he was kept omnipresent by my mother, because she was a very clever woman. She was a teacher, and she knew it was important to keep people that were no longer around in the mind's eye. So he was never not there in conversation. And of my sisters, I probably dealt better with that than anybody else, just because of the way my brain worked, I suppose. Yeah, it was just the way it was. And he was a mysterious man, and he did appear. I found him by contacting actually the local church, because he was very strange. He was training to be a priest when he met my mother.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was very interesting. And my mother said, "Why don't we contact the church? They'll know where he is." And of course they did. But he was miles away. He was in Australia. But he came back. And so I met him for the first time when I was probably 13, 14. And I really liked him. He was great, absolutely great. And we had a super relationship. But then he disappeared again. And then he came back again. So yeah, for me, it was not an issue having this reappearing father. I found it quite fascinating, really.
Well, I wonder how that affects your sense, though, of nostalgia. This idea that you can be in relationship with someone that's not there, like that they can live in your mind
Yeah.
more so than they can live in your physical presence. That's pretty similar to your thinking about the past now,
Yes, it
like you're
is.
living in your mind.
Yes, yes, it is. Really, I think nostalgia is just a coping mechanism for a lot of people. And it's a jolly good one because it works. It really does work. And maybe I've taken it a lot further than some people do by taking the imagery from those nostalgic moments, and then manipulating them into forms of art. It's just playing, really. All I do is it's just playing. It's just a continuation from being a child.
Can you talk about your approach to composition on let's compare, say, the big plate. You've done one that's was the Queen, and then you've done another that was Freddie Mercury. Basically, it's the plate is a framing device. Can you talk about how you think about pattern versus like the main focal point of the person, the portrait?
Well, it's interesting because I haven't made flat things for quite a long time, and I've only just started going back to them. It's always been vessels. The way I work out the patterns for these plates is that I'll start off with the subject matter. So I started off with the late Queen and drew her on, and then everything that goes on after that I work out on paper. Then I cut out the papers and then fold them and move them around and then lay them on the plate. And then I use a stylus, a round nose stylus, and just push the pattern through because it's really soft, the clay. So yeah, so that's how I work them out so that they're symmetrical and so they fit. And then I don't work out the colors then. I just make them up as I go along. I make a huge palette. When I'm working on something like that, I'll make up every color I can think of that I might need, and in varying, darknesses, shades, and so that I've got a huge palette, and then off I go with a slip trailer or a brush.
So in traditional slipware, these things were often made in molds, and the slip was put on when the clay was pretty wet so that it would all shrink together. But you live outside of Granada, which is like super dry.
Oh, it's ridiculous. My workshop's in a cellar, which helps. So it's quite dark and damp-ish down there. It's better down there. And I just work under swathes of plastic. So they're on top of the pot, they're on top of me. It's crazy.
So you put them over the top of your head also?
I have done when it gets really hot. When it gets really, really hot, it goes. So I have a big plate, and I use actually cling film. I don't know if you call it cling film.
Yeah, saran wrap. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, shrink wrap, that's it. So that will go around it. And then with a scalpel, I cut a tiny bit like an operation and work on that bit. And then I seal it up again. And then I go and cut another bit and open it up. And that, when it's really hot, that's what I do. We've had probably one of the hottest summers we've ever had here. We've seen 42 degrees every day for quite a long time. It's not so bad now.
When you're planning a big show like this Messam show, you obviously can't control the weather.
No. So I control the plastic.
Right. So in the work cycle of a year, trying to get together this work for this show, how do you divide out, like, okay, now I'm going to work on vessels, now I'm going to work on plates, now I'm going to work on tiles, or do you work back and forth or simultaneously?
I usually only work on one piece at a time. So a big jar will take me 4 weeks at least. The jars are built, they're coiled, and I came up with a really good way of doing it. I use a cardboard shape so that whilst I'm coiling, I can just reach down to this cardboard shape, which has got a break on it so that I know how far in it goes. And on the banding wheel, I'll offer it up and just check that I'm still in parameters of the shape that I want to have. Because I've got very good at it now, and I know that they look like they're probably thrown, but they are still all coiled. And they're very thin as well. They're not heavy. And partly that's because I've got to export them. So they are quite, people pick them up and go, gosh, that's really quite light, isn't it? And also earthenware helps it to be light. So a build of a 0.5 meter tall pot would probably take me a week, including making the lid. I have to be really strict with myself about lids, because I've got to the end of the pot and I don't really want to make the lid. I just don't want to do it, and if I don't, then they don't fit. So I have a great little trick where I've finished the pot, I've got the neck of the pot done, and then I take a piece of paper and just place it over the wet rim of the neck of the pot, and that will give me an absolute size for it. So then I can file that. In fact, in my pottery, I have pads and pads full of these rings with little notes to myself of when I made it, what it was going to be, which is essential, because sometimes somebody will break a lid and they'll say, I need a lid. And I can go back to my pad of prints and say, yep, I've got it. I'll make it and get it to you.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors. This episode of the podcast is sponsored by Amoco Brent. For the past 100 years, Amoco Brent has been creating ceramic supplies for our community, ranging from underglazes to electric kilns, and they have no plans of slowing down. With over 3,000 products, Amoco Brent's top priority is making sure that all of their customer needs are met. From the professional to the student and everyone in between, their high-quality materials enable you to make your best work. To learn more, check them out at amoco.com or on Instagram and Facebook at Amoco Brent. You can also show them how you use Amoco by sharing your work online with the hashtag HowIAmoco. Can you talk about, as your career developed, moving from kind of a more traditional slipware potter to now making, they're vessels, but they're really art objects. Like, these are high cost objects sold in major galleries.
They are. I started off making casseroles and cups and saucers. I worked in an industrial museum and I was a performing potter. So for 11 years, maybe nearly 12 actually, I'd open every day during the summer seasons, and it was a long season. It started in March and went all the way through to the end of October. And it was very, very busy. And I'd have a team. We're all working. I've got somebody on a jigger jolly. I'm on the wheel throwing all day. I've got somebody else on glazing, somebody else on hand painting, because it was majolica in those days for me. And it was phenomenally successful and great fun, because we were all on stage, which of course really suited me because I trained in drama. It was perfect. It was a perfect platform for me. And it was when I left the museum, because I had to in the end. It was crucifying. And 11 years was more than anybody else had ever done on this museum complex. Because there were all sorts of tradesmen there. I was the potter. There was somebody who made brooms, and there was somebody who forged steel. And it was great. It was a lovely environment. And so when I eventually left, that was when I got colour, because I took another studio on my own and got colour. But the slipware was what I did at the museum, because it was a historically accurate thing that I could do in front of visitors.
What was the museum?
It was called Amberley Museum in West Sussex. And it's still there, and it's a fabulous place. Although I've never been back. I couldn't go back.
Too much toil that you've spent there?
No,
working?
Too much sadness.
Oh.
Because I loved it there.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I really did love it. And, it was an episode of my life that made me, because that's where I did my apprenticeship, really. It had to be that way. That's where I earned my stripes, where I became a potter to be reckoned with, because I knew what I was doing after 11 years. It took that long, though. It did. So yes, I've never been back. And then I took a small studio, also in Sussex, in England, and got colour for the first time. It was great.
When I look at the work, I'm so impressed by how you balance many colors at once.
So am I. I'm impressed. I don't know how it happens. If I think too much about it, it doesn't work. I mean, if we're looking at that Freddie Mercury plate, there's fillets of lime green against the red, but I just didn't think about it too much. I have to get right in the zone. And Freddie Mercury was an afterthought. It just came in the night. Most of the ideas come in the night, because I never switch off. And I'd done the Queen, and of course the Queen was still alive then. And everything I do because I love these things, or these people, or these songs, or whatever. It's all about what I love. And I didn't think the Queen was going to die when I did it at all. And then I realised, I don't know whether she's going to hang on. And the show in Messens was supposed to have the Queen on the invite. And then at the last minute, they said, we can't run with this, she hadn't died then, but then she died a few days later, and they said, no, we're going to have to go with Freddie. So it was all changed at the last minute. But yes, those two, the Freddie and the Queen, are available as a pair, and they're called The Last of England, and that is from the Derek Jarman film, The Last of England, which I think is, and I'd named it this before the Queen was even remotely ill. And I'm wondering, well, maybe I was channeling something, maybe I knew, because it's a terribly sad title, The Last of England. Again, it's loaded with nostalgia, isn't it? So that was all a bit of a scramble at the last minute to replace Freddie. But he'd already been made, but he just came as inspiration. I don't know what it was, the Queen, and the music, and so that's how it happened.
Well, it's interesting to me, you have a gay icon who was a hell of a singer. I mean, amazing voice, like a ton of range in his voice. And in some ways, he was both accessible and inaccessible. He had the public performing face, and then he had his own personal life. Same with the Queen. Like, as an American, everything I know about the Queen is not as an actual person. It's more of like the myth of the Queen. So when she passed away, it's almost like it didn't matter. That sounds callous. It's not that it didn't matter, but like she still lives in the public imagination, whether she's alive or not.
Yes, she does. Yes.
So can you talk about those two? One is representing an old England, and one is representing like a hip England.
I know they're completely juxtaposition, aren't they? They're worlds apart. And of course, Freddie Mercury isn't even British. He's so The Last of England is a really odd title to have for it, but he was a British icon. I don't think I can verbalize why these two. But they have quite full-on titles, both of them, because when the Queen died, I named that plate the Celestial White Queen of Unceasing Sorrow. So that was when she died. And Freddie is called the Immortal Red Queen of the Perpetual Night. So they're poles apart, but they do sit together in my mind.
Can we talk about your Britishness in relation to not living in the UK? Because you live in Spain, and being an expat, I've lived in other countries as well, and it does give you a strange perspective on your home.
Very.
Tell me about what you've learned by not being a British person, not living in the country.
It's very, very interesting. When we came to Spain, it was by accident. My husband, who is fully bilingual, he went to school in Spain as a young child. So he's hardwired. And a friend of his said, I want to buy a house in Spain. Would you come out with me and help me? So they set off together to find a house. He found a house and told me he'd found one. And I said, well, great, that's really good. Well done. And he said, well, you know, it's for us. And I said, I know, I'm fine. I'm really happy in England because I'm very English. You know, I'm a redhead. I don't go in the sun. I love it in England, and I still love it in England. But I don't think I'd like the England that has it's become. Anyway, we did end up buying this house, and it was a really little tiny house in the mountains, and it was idyllic. And we had a wonderful, wonderful time there. I thought when I went that, and I had to leave my fantastic job, which I was working in prisons, and I loved doing that, teaching pottery. But I thought when I came to Spain, I would learn a lot about Spain, but I didn't. I just learned an awful lot about myself and my coping mechanisms. And that was probably what was really good for my art, because in order to cope, I just made more pottery. So it was a good thing for me. I think everything that happens in your life is a good thing, really. You know, you always think, oh, gosh, this is going to be a bit of a shock, and shocks are quite good in some ways. And actually, I still learn an awful lot about myself in this strange land, and I love it. We've been here quite a long time. But everything, obviously, we had to make some very serious decisions after the England left the European Union, and yeah, do some serious stuff. Very good at serious stuff.
As I've talked to some British folks post Brexit, pretty much all potters that are trying to have careers are just so frustrated with it, because it's just all these levels of bureaucracy now to do the same thing that you could have done a couple years ago very easily, like get the clay.
Yeah, it is very difficult, but it's, you know, it's what it is. Nothing we can do about it.
So when it comes to living as an expat, I've lived in a couple different places, but when I lived in China, that was the time that I felt the most socially isolated, and I was really learned about a loneliness that I didn't know was possible.
Yes, I can understand that. And I did the same thing and still do the same thing in many ways. COVID was a breeze to me because, you know, I'd already been practicing before COVID happened. And it was a blessing because of the show, because I had to work. And in Spain, and probably the whole of Europe, it was much, much stricter. I could not leave my municipality for the first 5 months without police papers, a reason to move. So the municipality was really where our town hall was, or the church was. It wasn't very far. We were sealed into areas quite small. And that was, that was quite hard. But I have my kiln is in my other house, the one that we first bought, which is in the mountains. So I had to drive out of my municipality. I make it all in a house that we rent in the city, because it's less going mad territory to live in the city. And then I have to drive to the mountains to the kiln and put it on there.
How do you not mess the work up?
Oh, God. Well, it's that wonderful stuff, cling film, food wrap. It's fantastic. And I have lots of boxes with cushions in, and I lay everything down in them and drive it very carefully.
Wow. Getting back to this concept of being socially isolated, though, how do you live through the work? Because I do see that your work looks so vibrant, so engaged, so like over the top. And that to me is such a counterpoint to what I know can be a lonely existence when you're an expat in another country and you don't.
But I'm not lonely at all.
Mm.
No, I've got a lovely husband. You know, no, I'm not lonely at all.
Well, that's good to hear. Yeah. So really, you're an introvert, and this has been a good experience.
I'm an introvert, also an extrovert. Because for example, tonight I'm going out into the bigger city, and we're meeting a friend of my husband's. My husband used to be in the music industry, and this is somebody he worked with 35, 40 years ago. So we're going to meet a musician tonight in the city, and that's just fantastic for me. And he's American. Oh no, his wife's American. He's Canadian. And it's going to be great. So you get these little jewels of concentrated meeting times. There's much less drift here. You don't, everything is quite purposeful. You crystallize those moments when you're going to meet someone, or when you're working. It's pure. I've never actually verbalized this, but it is pure time, whether it's work or socializing. It's quite nice.
Well, it reminds me a lot of potters in the US that live in very remote areas and then sell their work in the city. I mean, that in a way, that's the way to make money, is you live where it's cheaper and then you sell where you can get more money.
Yeah. Well, that is what I'm doing. I mean, it's really cheap here. Really cheap. It's great. And it's really healthy. And the food is really healthy. Yeah, I'd much rather be here for those sort of reasons. And I'm nostalgic for the England that I did have. And I'm not sure if it's still there. I'm going back next week, but I haven't been back for months and months. So that'll be a bit strange.
Well, to wrap up, I want to come back full circle to this show. And we talked about the lipstick wall pieces, and then what else there's jars in the show. What else is going to be in the show?
Well, that's it. It's a selection of jars, and the two panels. The two panels are the really big ones. That's the biggest parts of the show, and they're the ones that take me the longest to make. Yeah, so that is it. I've got 13 standalone song titles as well, which are quite good fun. Things like I've got the Rolling Stones in there. I've got David Bowie in there, and so they're sort of much more affordable for the sudden buy.
So, do you have collectors that have collected your work over time? Like who buys the work?
Mainly men, oddly. I have more serious male buyers than female, but yeah, a lot of people have supported me for a very long time. People that have bought really early work and still buy the work now, even though the cost has changed. They're really loyal. It's very interesting.
Do you mind if I ask you how much one of those jars would be?
One of the big jars would be about £9,000 now, but they weren't that much before.
Which seems fair for the fact that these take a month.
Of work, yeah.
Yeah. And that there's a level of obsessive skill involved in. I mean, I haven't specifically said this, but the thing that I'm most attracted to in your work is that there is an obsessive skill that a lot of people, I don't think, are willing to put the time in to get.
I agree with you, but I am completely obsessed by it. And one of the reasons that I make pottery is because it's so difficult, and it is always difficult, and it never gets easy, and that keeps me going. And if it ever becomes easy, God knows what I'll do. But it is so difficult.
I think that a lot of people can relate to that. I've just seen so many people standing beside the kiln when I've worked in schools and art centers, just kind of shaking their head, just like, why ceramics?
I know, but it's a way of life, isn't it?
Well, to wrap up, can you leave a way for people to find out more, either your social media or website, and then also plug the website for Messums?
My social media, so that's Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, is Studio Slipware. That's all you need to look for, Studio Slipware. Messums are messums.com. anyone can go to the Messams London site and look at the show details, because they're all up there at the moment. And if they're interested, they can register for the work. If they register for the work, they get to look at the viewing room. There's a viewing room which will go live, I think, on Monday. I did write it down. Saturday, the 8th. And that's for buyers, so they can go in. Well, anyone can go in and have a look and say, oh, yes, I quite like that. I suspect that's when those single tiles will disappear. There's a lot of people quite interested in those, particularly Sweet Transvestite from the Rocky Horror Show. That's in there.
Okay, yeah.
So go on to Messams London, and you'll see all the information there.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it.
That's all right. It's great. I've enjoyed it.
I'd like to thank Kitty for coming on the show. It was a pleasure to chat with her, and you can keep up with everything she has going on by following her on Instagram at Studio Slipware. I did want to take a minute to thank our sponsor, Amico Brent, for sponsoring this podcast, as well as many others on the Brickyard Network. If you or your organization is interested in becoming a sponsor, you can get in touch at brickyardnetwork.org. I'll be back next week with another episode. Thank you all for tuning in. If you'd like more information on the artists on the show, or if you'd like more information about the workshops and events that I'll be having in the next couple months, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook under Carter Pottery. Another great way to support the show is to leave me a comment on iTunes. To do that, search Tales of a Red Clay Rambler under iTunes Podcasts, and you'll find a page that's linked to our show. Thank you guys for the support.
We respectfully acknowledge and honor all Indigenous communities whose lands we reside on in the United States, and recognize that we are uninvited guests on the occupied, unceded, and ancestral lands of over 500 nations indigenous to North America. By acknowledging and reflecting upon the contemporary lived experiences and histories of the Indigenous peoples here and globally, we may begin to take essential steps towards creating a more equitable world. Learn more through the hashtag Honor Native Land initiative of the U.S. Department of Arts and Culture, and consider contributing to Indigenous-led organizations doing important work to further health and wellness, sovereignty, and self-determination of the First People of the lands you reside. This podcast is a production of the Brickyard Network, an extension of the Archie Bray Foundation for the Ceramic Arts. To find out more about our lineup of ceramic podcasts, visit brickyardnetwork.org.